I think medical schools want to see this stuff. They want to know, are you a fun person? Are you three-dimensional?
So what Ask the Dean is, for some of you that are on here for the first time, potentially, we answer questions. Type your questions. We'll bring up as many questions as possible, and we will answer them with our combined knowledge and wisdom, supposedly, that we have. So let's go ahead and jump in. We'll have some announcements as well throughout the session. Talking about some new stuff coming to Mapped, talking about some discounts that we're going to have on advising, and a few other things.
And just let me point out that we are 4th of July colors today. You guys are in blue. Verenia's in white. I'm in red. Hey.
You got it.
And I'm in pride.
I'm in pride.
So I have all the colors. All right, let's jump in.
Love it. Love it. My dad is a doctor, and I was wondering how much I should talk about this in my personal statement. I don't want it to be a major part, but I also don't want it to seem like I'm ignoring it. Perfect analogy there, right? I've said all the time that if you have a parent who's a physician, that's going to be a part of your story, whether you like it or not, whether you want to write in your essay, which I don't recommend, but every student loves to, of like, my dad's a doctor. That's why I didn't want to be a doctor for a long time, but here I am. Your parent being a physician, you were obviously exposed to medicine very early on, assuming they were still practicing. And so you're right. It shouldn't be a big part of your personal statement, but I think it should be mentioned briefly. Because that's part of your story.
Yeah, agree with that. Totally agree with that.
All right. Let's keep trucking.
Hello, I took 6 credits at a community college for phlebotomy, in which I did approximately 150 hours of clinical hours. I was advised to list this as a volunteer medical clinical experience. Is this an accurate categorization for these class hours? Sounds good.
Yeah.
Weren't being paid for them. They're not paid medical clinical. I'm assuming that the fear here is that they were tied to a class. Therefore, I'm not sure if I can list them as hours on my application. Scott, fears around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all discussed this before, but all of you guys listening, you obsess about every little detail of the application, and I totally get it. But you can include anything in that list of extracurricular activities that you want to. And if you do it the wrong way or do it in a way that's different from what the med school would have done or suggested, then so be it. They're not going to punish you for that. They're just, you're making the best guess that you can. You're evaluating, what you've done and trying to put it in there to the best of your abilities. So don't freak out if it's not exactly what, somebody else would have done or whatever. I think putting it in there is very important. Definitely got good clinical hours there. So absolutely.
Yep.
Great.
How do you guys look at people who take an extra semester or year? Verenia, in your position, students would come to you and go, I don't know if I need to take an extra semester to fit these classes in. What are your thoughts on students taking extra time?
Oh,
you are muted.
Sorry.
No,
I said I think that it's absolutely fine. Really, if it's what needs to happen for you to graduate successfully and still try to pull, a strong GPA by the end of it. Obviously it's a conversation to have with your family, but if they're involved in any additional costs for taking the extra semester or the extra year, but the important thing is that you finish and that you apply when you're ready. That's how I would advise students.
Yeah. Scott, from the director of admissions standpoint, when is too long? Like, they're taking one class a semester over the course of 10 years. At what point is it too much?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what the medical schools really want to do, and let me hasten to say that there's so many non-traditional students these days, and I use that term in a broad way to suggest not only students who are maybe older students coming back to school, but they're doing it in a non-traditional way. The old way of doing it in 4 years, and you do it in 4 years, and that's all, and you go through and you graduate after 4 years. For so many students, that's just not reality. I mean, coming from a guy who was on the 5-year plan myself, I'm very sensitive to this issue, and I think I agree completely with what Vernia said. You do what you got to do, and you go forward. Now, having said that, what the medical schools do want to see is, at points, they want to see that you're able to be a full-time student and do it in a way that makes you successful. Now, if you're working and you can only take a certain amount every semester, then you do what you got to do and you do what you can. And so, I've always said there's an optimal way of doing it, there's an acceptable way of doing it, and there's a not acceptable way of doing it. Is taking a class or two at a time, because you're working or have family obligations or whatever, is that acceptable? Yeah, absolutely, it's acceptable. Is it optimal? Well, potentially, maybe not, but you do what you can do.
Yep. All right. Thomas asks, I have a 2.57 cumulative GPA with a 3.47 postbac, but 3.82 last 35 credits. I'm on my way to getting a 4.0 in my MA Biomedical Sciences, 33 credit BCPM. How do I prevent getting auto-screened by GPA? The old digital shredders.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about, Scott, the capabilities that medical schools have. So many students focus on 2.57. I have a 2.57. I'm going to be screened out. Students don't realize, or they just choose to ignore the fact that medical schools get every single data point.
Yep.
And they can filter, sort, graph, do whatever they want. And so this student did the math for us. He says, hey, my last 35 credits, I have a 3.82. Now, I've had personal conversations with deans and directors of medical schools, one saying, we look at the last 20 hours of science. That's how we determine if you're academically capable. That's what we're looking for to calculate your GPA. I had a recent conversation on the Premed Years podcast with NORDA, which is the new osteopathic medical school in Utah. And their director of admission says, we look at your last 60 credit hours. That's what we are looking for. Medical schools don't just take what you see in the printed application, the PDF that you get from AMCAS, ACOMAS, TMDSAS, and go, oh, here's all of your GPAs. That's all we care about. Right? Medical schools get every single data point, and the software that they use can do whatever they want, depending on each dean and director, each admissions committee setting the parameters that they want.
Yep. That's exactly right. And if it's a data point, and keep in mind that the medical schools are getting GPAs that are multiple GPAs, not just a cum GPA and a science GPA, but they're getting GPAs cut up by semester and by whether they're science or non-science, and just a lot of different GPAs to look at and to evaluate. And so yes, medical schools use screening tools to look at various things, but they're not just going to zap you just because of the one cumulative GPA number. I agree with you completely. Different schools have different takes on how many hours they want to see in that last whatever hours thing. And so I would say to this student, the question he's asking is, how do I prevent getting auto-screened? You don't do anything to prevent getting auto-screened. You submit all your stuff, and that's all you do. And then the medical schools are going to look at it in a variety of different ways and evaluate things. And they're going to read your application, and they're going to actually look at your personal statement and your letters and, all that. And so, don't be freaked out that you've got to do something to manipulate the process so that you don't get screened out. It doesn't really work that way.
Yeah. Scott, or Brittany and Rachel as well. Have you guys seen Moneyball or know about Moneyball?
I know of it. Yeah, I've never watched it.
So it's a movie based on a book, based on a person who really changed the way that scouts recruit baseball players. And that line of thinking has transformed athletics in general, professional sports in general. Because historically, they would go, "Oh, that guy hits 500-foot home runs. We want him on our team." But Billy Bean, who is the guy behind Moneyball, the guy that it's written about, really figured out how many walks does this person have? How many strikeouts does this person have? How many singles? How many doubles? How many triples? And he is breaking down each part of this individual person and not just looking at how far can he hit the ball or what's his batting average, but every intricate detail. And that's what medical schools are doing to your applications. Yep. So it's an interesting way to think about it that just popped into my head.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people fear that digital analysis makes screening easier to be black and white, but I would say it makes it more gray because there's so much more nuance. Where before you were dealing, with paper. I mean, a while ago, right? But the Q might have gotten a lot of attention because it was the easiest thing to calculate. But now, everybody can slice and dice.
Yep.
Paper applications. Oh,
I remember when the MCAT was twice a year on paper.
When I started in this business, the applications were paper, and there were all the bubble forms that you bowl in, your name and your all this stuff, and it was an ordeal.
Yeah,
that was before my time.
Rub it in.
Sorry.
Thanks so much.
As a veteran, thank you for your service. How would it look for me to get a letter of recommendation from a previous Master Sergeant of CO? I don't know what CO is.
Maybe it's or CO.
I think they mean or CO.
Yeah. Okay. Or CO would make more sense. Commanding officer.
I think that looks, would not be bad at all. I mean, this person obviously knows you well and is going to be able to say a lot about you and your work ethic and your how hard you work and how well you work with other people. And I mean, I would say go for it.
Definitely. Yeah, agreed.
How is doing 2 years at community college and 2 years at a 4-year university viewed when applying to medical school? Looks like you did 2 years of community college and 2 years of university. Yep. Get good grades, do well in the MCAT.
Yeah. Be consistent. Be consistent. And that's the key. That's the key when moving from a community college to a 4-year university. You don't want to drop off. So if you're making 3.7 GPA at community college and you go to, and then you transfer to the university and your GPA suddenly goes down to a 3.2, not a good sign. So, you want to be consistent. Perform the same way at community college as you're doing at the university.
Yep. Agree. That one's better. Doesn't cover us. How representative, important, and accurate is the Casper test for admissions? I only have 3 schools requiring it, but I didn't do well at all. That is the ultimate question. So Dr. Kelly Dorr, one of the co-founders of Casper, I've had her on the Premed Years podcast, episode 303. And she's also been a part of MAP's National Premed Day 2 years in a row, last year and this year. And so you can go find her most recent talk on the Mapped YouTube channel, mapped.tv. At the end of the day, we don't know, right? We don't know how representative, important, accurate it is because number one, it's still very new. Number two, a lot of medical schools are still using it for data collection. And number three, every medical school uses it for different purposes. Mm-hmm. So it is what it is at the end of the day.
Yeah, I would also say that the student says at the end, but I didn't do well at all. I question how the student knows that. They feel like
quartiles now.
Okay.
Yeah. So they get a score of 0 to 25, 25 to 50, 50, 75, 75 to 100.
Right.
So they may have got a 0 to 25, which is like, and Am I a serial killer? I don't know. I want to go take the test to see how I do, because
right.
I don't know if I would do very well either. But yeah,
well, okay.
There's just so many variables that go into Casper in terms of how medical schools are using it, whether or not the 3 that require it are actually using it in terms of admissions, or they're just using it for data collection. It's still unknown.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Daniela asks, would a low GPA caused by non-science courses affect my science GPA? By definition, no. Does it not look good? Yes. But it depends, again, what the schools are looking at. Do they focus more on science? Do they focus more on overall? That is the question. I am applying this cycle and have submitted my AMCAS app, but I'm not taking my MCAT until August. Will this affect my likelihood of receiving an interview? So should I give my timeline spiel?
Yep. Yeah, do it.
So AMCAS application, we'll talk about AMCAS specifically. And I'll throw in some other ones in there as well. But AMCAS specifically, we all know, opens up in May. You can submit it May 27th this year. Medical schools did not receive the first wave of applications, verified applications, until June 25th. So just a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago, roughly, as we're recording this. And they send out secondaries at that point, and students turn around secondaries. And so you're looking at kind of mid-July by the time secondaries are in, your primary is obviously in, and whether or not your letters of recommendation are complete, whether or not your MCAT score is complete, determines whether or not your application is complete for the medical school to determine whether or not they want to look at it. And so every moment, every day, every week past that July 15th kind of time frame is delayed compared to everyone else who has their application complete. Now, the question is, when are medical schools actually starting to look at applications? We've talked a lot about, at this point in time, mid-July, schools are finalizing their cycle. There's still some shuffling going on. And so a lot of admissions committees are using that time to kind of put their feet up and reevaluate things and do some postmortems, talk about how the last cycle went, and revamp anything moving forward. And so it's kind of late July, early August when medical schools are finally getting into this next application cycle. That process is a little bit moved forward for TMDSAS and for AMCAS because those applications go out a little bit faster. But that's what you're looking at. And so when you take the MCAT, let's say the end of August, and your score comes out at the end of September, then yeah, you're delayed. But if that's what you need to do to get an MCAT score that's going to help you be more competitive, then it is what it is. Ideally, again, your application is submitted, which the student's is, but that's how you have to look at it. Is, again, going, Scott, back to your kind of analogy of what's ideal, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. Acceptable is you've submitted your application, you're taking a late MCAT, and you just hope that medical schools have some interview spots left by the time your MCAT score comes in and they get around to looking at your application.
Yep, that's right. I agree with that completely. It's all the balancing act between timing and being prepared and having the MCAT in a way that's going to work for you and really represent you. And so you balance those two out, and you recognize that there are consequences. There's nothing you can do about it. So you move forward and you hope for the best.
That is it. You're muted, Rachel. I bet you said something completely grand.
It was amazing. Yeah, the one thing I was going to chime in is, so for this question asker, 100% what Scott and Ryan said. You've just got to make the best of the situation you're in now. For people planning ahead for future years, this is part of why we often say aim to take the MCAT in January or March the year you apply. Because then if a retake needs to happen, it's more likely to be March, April, May. August is not the end of the world, but optimal ideal. So future planners, take heed.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Take heed. Love it.
It's just saying oiga.
Could someone explain what the initial review of applications looks like when they get transmitted to schools and how secondaries are evaluated in conjunction with the primary? Well, Scott, you used to be the director of admissions at a medical school, so I'll let you tackle this with the caveat that every medical school is different.
Everything's different. That's right. So, I think that it depends on the process, obviously, of the particular medical school. I think what they're looking for, what initially happens is there's going to be, potentially there's going to be some sort of screening mechanism to identify in a sort of a digital kind of way, students that they want to look at, students that they're chopping up the applicant pool that they got that week into manageable pieces. Potentially, there's going to be for those students that automatically fit into what they're looking for, whether that means GPA MCAT or whether that's something else, they may well forward that those applications onto reviewers to look deeper to actually read the applications. These reviewers could be faculty members, they could be staff members. They're certainly members, whether voting or not, of the admissions committee. And depending on the school, there's going to be some mechanism that's going to allow for an application to be identified for interview. Now, maybe that is 2 reviewers out of 3 say yes, or maybe that's 1 reviewer says yes, or maybe they have an automatic review set up. Depending on your GPA and MCAT score, maybe there's an automatic interview for certain combinations of those numbers. It depends a little bit on the school, but there's going to be a process that's going to whittle the large number of applications down to a more manageable group and that's not all numbers oriented. That's going to be a variety of things that may go into that. But there's going to be some review process that will identify what they're going to be looking for. Now, in terms of this is going to be happening for complete applications. So that means MCAT scores there, secondary applications there, all the letters are there, everything's set so that the application can move forward and be evaluated by the school in whatever process they have. And so they're going to be looking at all of that information and then making a decision whether they want to interview.
Do you recommend reusing stories, i.e. most meaningful experience in a clinical position from primary in secondary questions, or should I use a completely different story? Thank you. So we've talked about this a bunch, Verinia, right? And
Yep.
Students often avoid their best answer to avoid talking about something similar. So what do you recommend around this?
I think if it's your story and if it's what you're trying to impress to the committees that this is your motivation for pursuing medicine, that it's okay. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, if there's other incidences or other stories that you can contribute, that you can also highlight. It also, I guess, also depends on the questions that are being asked too, right? In the secondaries. But if it all revolves around this one event, then it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a couple things, right? So number one, I'll say that I typically don't recommend stories for secondaries. I don't think they work very well because you're answering a very specific question, and then when you lead with a story, then I'm like, well, why aren't you answering the question? It's like you're a politician just completely avoiding the question that was asked. But as you mentioned, right, it depends on the question being asked, and I think there's a difference between can I use the same story or can I use the same activity? Right. So if a student mentioned being an EMT as the most meaningful on their primary, and a secondary asks, what's the most meaningful activity you've done? Well, then it's being an EMT potentially, because that's what you said on your primary, and that's fine. And maybe you just highlight a different aspect of it, or just don't copy paste, right? But don't lessen your story to avoid talking about something similar. And that goes for secondaries and interviews. Rachel, you're still muted.
Yeah, it's fine. I was just agreeing with you.
As you should. No, just kidding.
I want to spare the audience from my heavy sighs, and yet. Okay.
What is the best way to speak about academic struggles, being low income and working? Well, AMCAS has a special section called the disadvantaged essay. So you mark yourself whether or not you would like to be considered disadvantaged. And that will give you a 1,325 character, quote unquote, essay that you can respond to. And that's probably one of the best places for that. If you're applying TMDSAS, they have an optional essay. That's probably a good place for that. AMCAS, unfortunately, doesn't have a great spot for it. So potentially in secondary essays, if the question comes up. Scott, probably not something for personal statement. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would say, your personal statement needs to be positive. It needs to be upbeat. It needs to be focused on your story and what now. In as much as your academic struggles have fit into the story that you're telling of why you want to go into medicine, then yeah, I could see it that way. But generally speaking, I would say no, not in the personal statement.
I have a 344 cumulative, 318 science. I got 1 D, but haven't gotten anything lower than a B since. 4 research publications and lots of clinical hours. Should I look into pursuing an SMP or postbac? So here is something. I'm gonna share my screen real quick and show you mapped and what we talk about all the time with what does your trend look like? Right. And so as we are on mapped here, you can see this green thing that says CASPA because we changed it. Let me, I'll change back to, I'm a pre-med student. We'll show you that in a minute. So as a pre-med student, my cumulative here is a 324 and a 316 science GPA. Not too far off what this student was saying. But you can see that this upward trend of a 385 during that semester, 374, 393, 370, 4.0 across 4 credits there and 8 credits there and 8 credits there and 2 there and whatever, right? The trend needs to be talked about if you're going to say, hey, here's my GPA, what should I do next? Because you may have a 324 cumulative GPA with an amazing upward trend like this, and oftentimes we'll tell you, go for it, right? You don't need more classes. You've proven academic capability. Now, this specific example is only, 12, 20, 25-ish credits. So maybe not enough. Scott, you often say about 45 credits to show that academic capability, to show that continued upward trend. But that has to be discussed. So for the student asking this question, I don't know if you should do a postbac or an SMP because I don't know if you have an upward trend or not. Let's assume for a second, Scott, that they don't have an upward trend.
Yeah, I would say if there's no upward trend or it's real choppy and stuff, then I would recommend the student really looking seriously at a SMP or some sort of postbac program to continue to suggest to the medical schools that you realize what the problems are and that you're going to, you can do the work and you want to do the work. So, absent a trend like you're suggesting, then I would say, yeah, I would seriously consider it with a nice upward trend, such as you displayed on the thing there. The more hours you have in that upward trend, the more it's going to get attention. And the more credibility there is to that upward trend. And so, I usually suggest 40 hours or so, but, other schools may say 30, 35 or whatever. But my feeling is that the more hours you have, we've had some students who've said, well, I've done 12 hours of, or I've done, my last 15 hours are great. And, whatever. That's really not enough to say this is a trend. We need to see more.
While we're talking about Mapped, should we let people know about one of our promotions we're offering?
Sure.
Seems like a great time.
What would you like to talk about?
Well, so a couple exciting things. One is you guys might know you can always try Mapped for free for 14 days. But if you use the promo code on the screen, 30 days free, you can try Mapped and get your first 30 days free. That's no credit card, no obligation. It'll let you put one in if you're sure you're going to want to join, but you can definitely use the first 30 days at no cost.
Yep. You put that in here in this promo code.
Right there. Yeah. I'll put that in the chat too.
Okay. Awesome.
And then, while we're talking about it, I think you briefly showed it, but we do have now Mapped for both pre-med students and physician assistant students.
Yeah.
So that is super, super exciting. It was always part of our big vision. I mean, Ryan, when you and we've been talking for years about making something like Mapped, and we always knew we'd start with pre-meds. It's the audience you and I know really well, and it's a big one. But there's so much overlap in future healthcare professionals and the way they navigate those first few years of being, pre-med, pre-PA, pre-dent, pre-pharm. A lot of that is similar. And the nation needs more of all of those. I mean, we've just got facing a real healthcare shortage. So we're excited to help everybody. So pre-PA students can now join. And as you saw, it's as simple as just choosing which one you are when you sign up. And over the next, months and years, we'll be adding more pre-healthcare stuff.
Yep. And so once you commit on in Mapped, you can see here this student, it says future PA, ignore that because you can see from the side, they have MCAT listed here. Under the GPA details, you have AMCAS, COMIS, TMDSAS, where you can pick and choose because each application service does things a little bit different. It talks about MCAT score here on the dashboard. If you decide at some point that you don't want to go to medical school anymore and you want to go to PA school, you just come in here to your profile and switch it around and save it. And then what'll happen is Mapped will change for you. So now you can see on your dashboard, it has CASPA GPA calculations. It has PA CAT, which is the kind of MCAT version for pre-PA students. It'll also let you enter GRE details because some PA schools want that as well. PA school list is coming there. And so it'll just transform automatically for you, or the other way around, right? If you're pre-PA and you decide you want to go to medical school, then you just come back in and change to being a pre-med student. And that is it for that. Cool. So if you guys have any questions about Mapped and capabilities, let us know. We can talk about Mapped. Verinia, you probably most definitely have worked with students the most recently, right? Coming from Hofstra. Mm-hmm. Students, if they came to talk to you and had all this laid out and mapped, how much easier would that have made your job?
Oh my goodness. I can't tell you how many academic plans I created by hand because I'm old fashioned. I like to do things by hand. But students would walk away like, man, I wish this was something I could access on an Excel sheet, or sometimes we'd create something on Excel together, but having this laid out with charting the trends and charting GPAs and across the different application systems, it's a game changer.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah.
And you can invite, right? If Verinia was your advisor at Hofstra, you can invite her to view your map data. You can invite any of your advisors just by going into this advisor tab and inviting the advisor that you want to have access to your information.
And
they can see all your information, but they can't do anything to it.
I really encourage students to do that, just because it'll make the conversation you have with your advisor so much more robust and meaningful, and really see your growth and your progress throughout your years.
Yep.
And we said that's no extra cost. So while you're in the free trial, once you're a paid student, it doesn't cost you or your advisor anything extra to invite them.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's get back to some questions. We'll talk more about math later if you guys have more comments on that. Let's see, where was I?
I've been at an international university for the past 3 years, and I'm transferring to the U.S. now. Should I finish with my current major, social sciences, or switch to science to finish prereqs faster? So, Scott, talk about the dreaded international conundrum.
Yeah. Well, so it depends a little bit on what school she's at. There are some international universities that have American accreditation. But barring those, if let's say it's just an international university in wherever, then none of those courses are going to be considered for meeting prereqs. And so, what I would say is to this student, Justine, I would really suggest that you look deeply at kind of what your plan is, what you're wanting to do, and what in terms of your major. You don't have to have a science major in order to be considered by medical schools. But I understand your interest in kind of moving things on quicker. Sounds like you probably have not done any of the prereqs yet. And if you did, you'd have to do them over again because you were at an international school. So none of those courses are going to be acceptable for meeting the prereq requirements. You'd also, depending on the school that it was and how many credits you have and stuff like that, you can get them evaluated, internationally evaluated by there are a variety of services out there that evaluate your transcript from your international university, and you can get those looked at. And then depending on how the school you transfer to in the U.S. transfers them in, they potentially could count as a bulk of hours toward what the medical schools want to see as a 90-hour sort of requirement for some schools in terms of what they want to see in the U.S. So all in all, Justine, what I would say is think deeply about what your desire is in terms of finishing your major and finishing your degree, and because I do suggest strongly that you finish the degree in the process of going to school. And so, but you changing your major to biology or something, you are going to get able to finish those prereqs faster, which I don't disagree with that part of your question.
Okay.
Yeah. How do admission boards view medical scribes who translate for physicians without being a certified medical translator? So first point here is you are a medical interpreter, not a medical translator. You interpret for patients. You don't translate for patients. Something I learned for a podcast and book that I'm working on, all about medical Spanish for pre-med students. And translating is written, interpreting is verbal. Who knew?
But they're a scribe. So maybe they are
a scribe, yeah, but they're interpreting for the patient. That's what they mean.
I just wanted to pick at you a little. I know you love that fun fact.
Yeah. I love little nuggets of wisdom. Scott, do they care?
No.
It's like
easy,
such a minute
easy
thing.
No, I don't think it matters one way or the other. And I hear this a lot, students sometimes as a scribe or as a tech of some sort, they may be asked to come in and interpret for the situation. And so this happens a lot. And let me just add, Kiara, that you using the word translate, I understood exactly what you were saying, regardless of what others may say.
Well, I understand I understand when people say they want to go into preventative medicine, but that's still wrong.
Oh, we're getting
God,
up
here
in
we go
here.
again. Here we go again.
Burn.
Little petty
So-
pedal.
Throwing some shade my way, are you?
Reel it back in. Reel it back in. Where this becomes a problem, and I don't want to say that medical schools don't care about anything. Where this becomes a problem, Kiara, is if you said, I went to Guatemala and I assisted in surgeries there.
Yes.
When you wouldn't be able to do that here in the States.
Right.
Right. If you're doing something here in the States, the physician, the hospital is probably okay with you doing whatever you're doing. There may be a little bit of a gray area, but the biggest issue that we see is going to a third world country and taking advantage of those people because they don't have any other options and doing things that you wouldn't be allowed to do here in the States because we have more rights here, so to speak.
Yep.
All right.
How should you include hobbies, arts, crafts, cooking in your activities? Should you at all? Well, good thing you should ask. AMCAS has a hobbies category.
Yep.
And you include it.
Yep, absolutely. They want to. I think medical schools want to see this stuff. They want to know: are you a fun person? Are you 3-dimensional? Do you have other interests? And I think this makes things interesting. And this is great fodder for interview questions in a non-structured interview. Great, oh, you play the violin. Let's talk about the violin, or whatever.
So one mistake that I often see when students include a hobby is they'll twist it around and talk about how it's prepared them to be a physician. Go. Playing the violin, the example that you just gave, has shown me how to be dedicated over long periods of time and need to commit to something and practice it, blah, blah, blah. And I know that as a physician, I will need to do X, Y, or Z. Like, that's not what they're looking for.
Yeah.
Just show them who you are. Tell them the favorite piece that you love to play, or tell them what it was like to play in the biggest concert hall that you've played in, or whatever.
Now, I will say one thing with regard to this issue of hobbies. What I have seen on occasion that can be detrimental is for a student to say, I don't have a whole lot of clinical hours, or I don't have a whole lot of shadowing hours because I work and I do, I'm going to school full time, I'm working full time, I've got a family and, whatever. And they make that big point, and then you look in their hobbies, and all of a sudden you see that 20 hours a week they're working out.
Yeah.
So this could come back and bite you if that were the situation, because the medical school is going to say, "Oh, so you have 20 hours a week to work out, but you don't have any time to do clinical, clinical activities." That's not going to fly.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
I have taken a year of ESL classes at community college in my first year of college. Should I include that in the application, and should I mention anything about that in the personal statement? Yes and no. Every class that you take, every classroom that you step foot in, you need to include that on your application. You need to include the transcript. So even though you went to a 4-year university and you took a class at community college, while you're at the 4-year university, you need to include that on your application. Every single class, whether you withdrew from it, whether your university has a grade replacement policy and they took it off of your transcript, or they don't calculate it in your GPA, you have to include it in your medical school application.
Yep.
And no, it doesn't belong in your personal statement.
No.
Easy peasy.
Lemon squeezy. Some classes were missing on my AMCAS due to, quote, academic renewal. I don't remember what the grades were. I'm assuming they're transcript. I don't know. Anyway, from 2008, and they aren't on my transcript. The school didn't know whether either when I called. What do I do? Scott, do random students have access to the clearinghouses? Or no? Like if they potentially went to a clearinghouse that their university used to kind of store all that data?
I don't know the answer to that. I have no idea.
I would guess no, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. So in this particular situation, if it's not on your transcript and the school doesn't know when you call and everything, then I don't know what other option you have.
Yeah.
You can't include anything on there if you don't have access to know what it was.
Yep.
Yeah. Seems like you're in a loop there.
Yep.
Be as honest as you can be.
Yep.
I have an option to do pass-fail for my last physics quarter that I'm taking this summer. Would that affect how oddcoms look at me? Oddcoms. Why did I say odd? Because they spelled it with 2 Ds. So I said it differently. Adcoms look at me if I did the majority of my prereqs at community college. So, pass-fail. Vernia, thoughts?
I think we're past, during COVID, obviously there was that option. I don't think they're going to look at it the same way now. I think you really should still try to get that grade. As far as the community college question, I mean, I don't think it matters. And again, it depends on the grades as well, right? On those courses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Letter grades. A lot of schools don't accept pass-fail for prereqs.
Yeah.
And as Verena, you mentioned, that changed during COVID, and my assumption is that schools are going to go back to letter grades only moving forward.
Yeah.
Right. Some of them are loosening about online going forward, but pass-fail is definitely temporary.
Yep.
All right. Let's see what's next.
Can we update schools with new MCAT scores? We didn't indicate on AMCAS that we would be retaking it, and the first score is not horrible if it's the latest test date they accept scores from. So I'm not sure how it works, but obviously AMCAS and the AAMC who administer the MCAT are the same company. My assumption is if you register for a new MCAT, that's going to trigger on your AMCAS automatically, but I don't know.
No, I'll chime in. This came up a week or two ago, so I looked into it, and it does not. So you still have to report it manually. But that is one of the things that you're allowed to report post-submission.
Yep.
So, after you've certified, like 98% of your application is locked down, but I'm going to take an MCAT, here's the date, is one of the things you're allowed to edit.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you have to edit. You're allowed to, and you have to.
Yeah. My intuition says, why would you want to retake the MCAT and not tell schools that you're retaking it? Because you're obviously retaking it because you're not excited about your first score or second score, whatever it is. Why wouldn't you want medical schools to know that and have them judge you based on the score that you're not happy with?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No, I agree with that.
Well, we've given them a concrete answer and something to ponder.
Things that make you go, Manjeet, applying to DO here. I was wondering if my lack of shadowing due to Canada's strict rules will be a problem. No, it is what it is, right? They'll know that you're a Canadian applicant, and medical schools understand that rules in Canada are different.
Yeah.
Is it fine if all my shadowing hours are with a single doctor, or should I shadow others?
I mean, I like to see a variety of shadowing opportunities. I think it's good to get a variety of viewpoints. I mean, the point of shadowing is to sort of view what the doctor's doing on a daily basis, or over the course of a day, depending on how long you're shadowing, and to see that from a variety of perspectives over different specialties, different settings, etc. I think there's a real benefit to that. Now, because what this does is, I don't know that the student here is suggesting this, but it sounds like a checkoff box. Well, I shadowed. Okay, check, got that box checked off. This is really about you getting to know what is this all about? What are they doing? What does their day look like? And different doctors have different days, and depending on the practice or the clinic or whatever, it can be very different. So I really like students who have a variety of shadowing opportunities that they've taken advantage of.
Agreed. I think if with one experience, it sort of limits, right, what you have been exposed to, and it may actually work against you because of that.
Mm-hmm.
And shadowing is really hard to get. So this kind of goes into the ideal, acceptable, not acceptable kind of realm.
Right.
It's completely acceptable to only shadow a single doctor because it's hard, but do your best to shadow as many as you can.
Yeah.
Thoughts on engineering pre-med track in undergrad? It's hard.
Whew, that's tough. That's tough.
Extremely. Be ready to
majors don't matter.
Be ready to take classes in the summer to stay on track.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, that said, if that's your passion,
right,
go for it. Yeah,
agreed.
We always say major in what you love.
Exactly.
It does strike me that you've got an interesting brain. If this is what you love. And I mean that as a high compliment.
Is that their brain on the plate there?
Okay. That's
okay. But yeah.
I'm currently a senior and have no explicit clinical or research experiences. Would you recommend a gap year to catch up?
Yep.
Specifically for clinical.
Yep.
Yes.
Research not necessary. If you want to do it, go ahead. But you need that clinical experience. The example I always give, or the question I always ask is, how do you know you want to be a physician if you haven't put yourself around patients, which is what clinical experience is.
Yeah.
You may have this idea, this grand idea, dream in your head of being a physician since you were a little kid. But if you have never tested that hypothesis, how can I trust you to get through medical school and residency and be a good harbinger for our medical institution in the future?
Yep, I agree.
Right. Yeah, and it's a common thing. I hear a lot of students say, like, well, I'll just do it on the gap year and I'll let them know I'm going to get those hours. But it's not just about the hours. So, you can project ongoing activities. So if you're doing it now and you're going to continue to do it, you can list it. But you're not going to have had that reflection in time and meaning.
I just wanted to mention, I thought when I started college, I wanted to be a high school English teacher. And so I observed a class, got through the observations. Second semester, when we actually had to do some actual student teaching type of experiences, I realized very quickly that wasn't what I wanted to do. So very important.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And I always give the kind of saying, taking care of your own Grandma Gertrude is very different than taking care of someone else's Grandma Gertrude.
Especially while her family members are yelling at you.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
and Grandma Gertrude.
That when what'd you say?
And Grandma Gertrude is yelling at you.
Yeah. Do you love it enough that even when no one's thanking you, you still feel excited to do it?
Yeah. Before we jump into the last half hour here, why don't we talk about some goodies, Rachel?
Yeah. All right. Well, why don't you do that while I find my banners?
I don't know what we're talking about.
Oh, okay. Please stand by. Then you take over the TV production stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. So super exciting. As you've seen, there's 4 of us now. So here at MAPT, we've got 4 advisors, Ryan and me, you've known for a while, Dr. Scott Wright, and we've got Verinia. As we're heading into the kind of back half of this cycle and starting to look ahead for next cycle, we wanted to make sure people know that if you want to do one-on-one work with us, it's available, sort of varying by who the person is. So Ryan and I are going to take just a few small single session students, and Verinia and Scott will be taking lots of students. So if you are applying right now and you've got secondaries and you want some help with your secondaries, or you want to go ahead and start prepping for your interviews, then we are doing a special promotion, and I'll put it in the chat. So if you use promo code SUMMER, or actually it's a coupon code on the website. If you use coupon code SUMMER, then you can get 20% off one-on-one essay feedback for secondaries or interview prep.
And we're awesome.
Yay!
And you are awesome.
Hey.
Yep. Yeah, we don't have many sales on the one-on-one stuff, but we wanted to introduce Verinia and continue to help you all through this application cycle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. We've lost track of where we are. Looking for a new question because there's a lot of overlap tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Are there free or cheap ways to show academic competency beyond a postbac program? Unfortunately, not in our
really
business-oriented academic system.
Yeah.
No. I mean, that's the whole point. Academic competency comes from academic institutions. And so, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I really respect why you're asking this. It's really, really expensive. And especially if maybe you made some mistakes or you just didn't have your eye on the prize when you were doing your undergraduate work the first time. So now you feel like you need to go back to prove yourself. It is really expensive. One thing I know we've talked about in the past, it depends, I think, for the student. Are you talking about getting another 20, 30 hours, or do you feel like you need to redo? Some cases, if it's really extreme, rather than a postbac program, you may be benefited to actually re-enroll in a 4-year program so that you can at least get some loans and aid from that. But it just depends on how many credit hours you need. And, are you talking about retaking prereqs anyway, or is it all the upper level stuff you need?
Right.
But yeah, it's an expensive process. Go ahead.
If I can chime in really quickly. I don't know all schools. I can only speak for my experience at Hofstra. But our postbac program, the postbac director was very willing to sit with a student prior to enrolling just to say, okay, let's look at your transcript. Let's see what exactly do you need to retake. It may not be the full program. So you may want to reach out to postbac programs and see if they're willing to do like a consultation, for lack of a better term, just to get a sense of what exactly you need to do. You may just be able to tailor it and only take a couple of classes. That may help.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right.
Is it okay to have clinical experience in one setting? For example, being a patient coordinator for an extended amount of time at the same clinic versus having various experiences at hospital, clinic, community center. So very similar to kind of your question, your kind of thought earlier, Scott, of like, is it good to have multiple experiences? I'll let you kind of chime in, or Verinia, it sounded like you wanted to chime in there. But
I was just going to point that out.
Hold on. Patient coordinator to me is not clinical experience.
Right.
So that's more of an admin role. So I don't know if that's the specific position you had, but be careful. And again, it varies based on different applications, whether they call it just general healthcare experience, but specifically for AMCAS, they would separate clinical versus non-clinical.
Right.
So Brittany, what were you going to say?
Oh, sorry. No, I was just saying the same thing. That's very similar to the previous question.
Yeah, and I think that, again, it's optimal, acceptable, unacceptable. I think optimally, yeah, it'd be cool to have different clinical experiences in different settings just to see what the differences are and to reflect on those differences. And but is it acceptable to only have one setting? Yeah, obviously that's going to be acceptable and be put into the mix of things that the medical schools are really evaluating. I would, as Ryan, as you said, I would really hone in on what your role is as a patient coordinator to make sure that, how much of that was administrative and how much of that was actually clinical in its very essence of what you're doing.
Yeah, here's an example.
Quality. Yeah, quality, not quantity. Working as a testing site specialist for a COVID-19 company, I mainly give instructions and at times perform nasal swabbing or oral swabbing on patients. Is this clinical experience? Part of it is.
Yeah. Some of it. Mm-hmm.
Interacting with patients equals clinical. Like, do you have to be sticking swabs up their nose? No, but interacting with patients is clinical.
Yeah.
Now, I say that, and then previously I said patient coordinator is not clinical. You're interacting with patients most likely, but that's admin role, right? If you're the emergency room registrar person who goes around and takes a patient's name and address and insurance card, that's not clinical experience. That's just you working in an admin function.
Yeah.
So there are some nuances there.
Right. And I'm not going to get to every one, but there are tons of questions that are variations of this. Here's the job. Is
Every
it
time.
clinical?
Every time.
We are going to encourage you to listen well and use your critical thinking skills to apply. So for AMCAS, they make the distinction, right? There's clinical, which is different from other healthcare activities, other jobs. So are you interacting with the patients in a way directly related to their care?
Mm-hmm.
You can do it, guys. You can figure it out.
I am a sophomore in college. I've been doing microbiology research since freshman year. If I apply to medical school with 3 years experience, no publications, and big outcomes, will my experience be worthless? Absolutely
not.
No.
Publications are not the end all be all in research.
Right.
Your experience, your reflection on that experience, what it meant to you.
Absolutely.
That's the standard research outcome. Nothing happened.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that is okay.
My default response to this was going to be, I hope you're putting in the same care as clinical, but this is one of the students who asked about their clinical experience. So they are. So good on you for doing both.
Yeah, good.
Ooh, here's a sensitive one.
I've been told to hide having kids on my application as it'll be looked down upon. Thoughts? There is 0 spots on the application that ask, do you have kids?
Mm-hmm.
So what we always talk about is be true to yourself, answer the questions, right? If being part of the PTA was a big part of your life and you want to mark it as the most meaningful, tell your story.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't agree with the premise here that hiding your kids would be that kids will be looked down upon in the application. I don't agree with that at all.
Yeah. So if this person, male or female or whatever, having a child is a big part of why they want to be a physician, then that's probably going to be part of their personal statement.
Yep.
I've seen plenty of stories of moms and dads and going through traumatic events with toddlers and preemies and infants and
Mm-hmm.
why that led them to want to be physicians. That's part of their personal statement. Surprise, I'm a parent.
Yep.
Tell your story.
PA question.
I'm late to the game, and maybe you talked about it already, but are there any good resources on the PA CAT? So, SEMPFI 007. PA CAT information is very, very scant at this point, right? It's a test that's only a couple years old. Mm-hmm. When we were looking, I'll add mapped back in here, but when we were looking to add PA CAT resources into maps like we have for pre-med students, where you can actually signify in here that you took a PA CAT test and it's a practice test. There are only a couple companies here, Exam Master, which I believe is the company that actually does PA CAT.
It is.
And PA Dog, which is a third-party test. There's only, like, this is a 20-question quiz. Like, there's not a lot out there at all. So your best bet is going to be just Googling around, finding a lot of these pre-PA companies, very similar to medical school headquarters and what we do at Mapped, that are out there talking about PA CAT strategies. But until the bigger third-party companies like Kaplan, Princeton Review Blueprint maybe in the future get into the PACAT world, there's just not a lot out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's always really tricky, because test prep companies, I mean, they're businesses, right? So they want to help as many students as possible, but they do sort of have to look into like the
scale.
Yeah, and the resource lift it takes to take on a new test and be sure you're doing it well. I was with Next Step Test Prep, which is now Blueprint, when we changed to the 2015 MCAT. And a lot of the bigger test prep companies, just surely out of practicality, refurbished their existing materials, right? Because they were thinking, well, we've got these decades of research, we'll stand on them. And that helped for some things, but it also caused a lot of confusion because the new test was much more different than people were expecting. And the truth is, Next Step did the best they could with the information that AMCAS put out there in 2014 and early 2015, but we still spent most of 2015 and 2016, so the year or two after the change, continuing to update our exams, because sometimes it takes several administrations of a test to start to really see, they said it was going to be 20% orgo and 80% bio, but it turns out that it depends on your form and there's fluctuation, right? Like people love to say the MCAT's only 11% physics, but you could get a physics heavy form. So now we're going to deal with the same thing with the PACAT. Like we've seen what's officially listed, and now we have to just sort of watch it evolve. So for those of you that are taking it this year, I'm sorry, it's a rough time to do it. The good news is that a lot of schools are still accepting the GRE, and that is an incredibly well-known exam. There's just enormous, great resources out there for GRE.
Yep.
All right.
I know it's not a check off box, but how many clinical hours sounds, quote, enough? I will keep pushing through, but what point does it hurt against me if I didn't hit a minimum? Scott,
1 million.
the question is, I know I don't need to check it off, but what can I do to check it off? You're muted there, Scott. I'll unmute you. Oh, I can't unmute you. Darn it.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I mean, I think that, just the premise of the question is unsettling to me. I don't think that I think you get as much clinical hours as you can, and you if you have the mentality of what is enough, then that scares me about what your interests are in terms of clinical medicine and getting patient contact hours and enjoying it and really reflecting on what you're doing and what you're seeing. And I think it's just a different mindset that I think is problematic. So as much as possible, yes, I think you need to, you need to enjoy it and do it and want to do more.
Mm-hmm.
I worry a little bit about the pushing through. I read it as if they're just kind of going through this just to make it to the end and get it over with. But that might just be my own assumption.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Vernia.
Yeah, that's such a loaded thing. Because for the question asker, like I get everybody wants black and white things, and there just aren't that many of them in the med application process. There's a lot more gray and nuance and sort of micro decisions than you would ever guess. And yeah, sometimes semantics in a question like don't have to mean that much. But yeah, my fear is if you're saying pushing through, does that mean that you dislike clinical, or does it just mean I'm really struggling to handle clinical and my family obligations and school, which is a legit thing, but med school is just going to be worse. So like, I want you to reflect on whatever that means for you. Only you know what you meant by that question, and figure out what your future years are going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
How do AdComs view virtual shadowing during the pandemic if they are accompanied with in-person hours? Should we even include them? Well, they only count if they're e-shadowing done with me. Those are the only ones that matter. No, Scott, I don't know if it was specifically talked about in the what do you call it?
Inside med
admissions.
admissions.
Yeah, when we did the COVID discussion, the first one. Was virtual shadowing discussed then? I forget.
I I don't remember completely. I think it was, but I think that again, back to this issue of the pandemic and kind of how it affected everything, and I absolutely think you should include it on the application. Whether or not the medical schools are going to put any credibility into it, that's up to them. That's in their in their thing. But if you've got, I say you put it on there. You made an effort. You did what you could do during the pandemic. You made an effort. You learned some stuff, and then so absolutely put it on there.
Yeah, my gut tells me that students who don't have virtual shadowing on their application are going to stand out as like, what else were you doing? Like, there was nothing else to do. Why didn't you at least do that?
Yeah.
So I would put it on there.
Yeah, I would. Same.
So I put the link in the chat. InsideMedAdmissions.com is where that replay of the COVID seminar we did. So we had a couple deans and directors in late March come and talk. One of the big things they said was last year we didn't have to make too many decisions like that because the pandemic hit so close to applying that most people were already in good shape. So they actually expected more impact this year. Yeah. So did they make promises that X number of shadowing hours would be okay? No, of course not, because they never do. Yeah. But they did say things like, we lived through the same pandemic. We'd want to see you do something rather than nothing. So, virtual is better than zero.
Yep.
Wow.
I have an okay MCAT score. A 513 is an amazing score. You people are killing me. And I've had schools reach out to me because of it. So I really want to retake it. No, don't. As I've scored way better. Can schools accept me with the first score while I retake it if they like? So Rachel, 513. So let me pause because a lot of people are like, wait a minute, they reached out to her. Now I'm going to make an assumption based on the avatar for this student that she's a minority student. And so when you sign up for the MCAT, you have the ability to check a box that basically says, I'm a minority and schools can reach out to me based on my MCAT score. I don't know the exact verbiage, and Rachel, you probably know that. Mm-hmm. So that's probably what she means, is she got a 513, which unfortunately, right, and we've talked about how the MCAT is horrific when you look at averages for different racial and ethnic groups. For her as a minority, so 513 is amazing. It's an amazing score for everyone.
Yeah, solid score.
For everyone. Yeah. You don't need to put an asterisk on it. For everyone. Mm-hmm. But that's probably how schools are reaching out to her. She probably checked that box that said, I'm a minority student. You can reach out to me, just through the diversity and inclusion offices at different schools.
Right.
Yeah. I debated putting this question up, but we did have a couple other MCAT high scores who were frustrated, and it happens, right? So 88th percentile, please stop and be proud of that amazing score, because, most pre-med students are used to being in the 95th, 97th percentile, but that's of the human population. You are all really special people. It's just that among pre-meds, a lot of those things that made you special are now normal. So 80th percentile on the MCAT is really stellar. Yeah. But yeah, sometimes there's an optics thing with retaking. And I mean, somebody else had said something about, I have a 509 and that's a bad score. That is not a bad score.
No.
There's a lot of GPA.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, if you took a ton of practice tests where you got a 520, then I could see how a 509 or a 513 might be a little disappointing. But yeah, I think you really have to think about, is it worth your time to retake if you already have a score that's strong? And I don't know that there's a line. Like personally, if I was getting 520 plus and I got a 509, I might retake. For me, somehow once you're in the teens, it starts to have a different look, but it's subjective. Yeah. And I think particularly with a score like a 513, if you mark on your AMCAS that you're going to retake, they're going to wait. Like, don't you want them just to review your app now with your already very good score?
Yeah. So without knowing anything else about this person, I'll tell you about a student who I interviewed right before we came on Ask the Dean. Another minority student, 510 MCAT, I don't know what her final GPA was, but I know she got a 3.65-ish in her postbac because she was a non-science undergrad major. But besides stats, right? Because Scott we talk about all the time. It's not just stats.
Right.
She was an amazing person who knew herself, who did everything right in terms of following her passions and not doing things to check off boxes, and went down her path and told her story in her application based on a lot of what we talk about here on the application. Scott, what's the most acceptances you've ever seen one student receive?
Oh, wow. I've seen maybe 10 or 12.
Yeah. So this student benefited from COVID, right? Because she didn't have to travel around.
Mm-hmm.
She applied to 39 schools, I believe, interviewed at 21 schools, and was accepted at 18 schools.
Wow.
Woo!
Wow.
That's amazing.
So I don't like throwing out that, yes, she was a minority, but just to compare, because this last student, I believe, was a minority as well. 510 MCAT, 3.65 post-bac GPA, solid stats.
Mm-hmm.
A 513 is a great MCAT score. Go spend your time doing something else.
Yeah, I agree with that. Totally agree with that.
Your patient, I'm a physician. I don't practice anymore. Your patients will never ask you, what did you get on your MCAT score?
Yeah.
And if they did, you could say, I scored 88th percentile. And they will go, oh, that's pretty amazing.
Yep.
Sometimes I talk about MCAT scores with my doctors, but I might be a special case. They find out what I did. Well, they find out what I do for a living, and then they want to tell me, like they want to be absolved.
Yeah.
Well, now I want to ask my doctors.
Nobody's asked me what I got on my MCAT.
What'd you get, Ryan?
I got the equivalent of about a 502, I believe. I got a 27 back on the old score.
No,
Yes, some of my very favorite doctors have above average but not exceptional MCAT scores.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Same here.
I got 10s on the science sections, and I got a 7 in verbal because I was just a very, very slow reader.
Mm-hmm.
Took me forever to read.
And that's okay.
And that is, look at me now. I'm a podcaster.
See, also, Ryan likes to communicate by talking, not reading.
Yes.
All right. Well, we've got about 8 minutes left towards the end. So we'll do another question or two. Also, maybe talk about advising and PA a little bit more.
Yeah.
Just to kind of wrap up with some promotion reminders. Let's see.
Hello, I work as a pharmacy tech in a hospital and deliver meds to patients. Can I count this as clinical, or would it be more appropriate as a job? Well, clinical can be a job. There's always confusion around job, volunteer, clinical, non-clinical. So I've often said working in a retail pharmacy, I don't really consider clinical experience because it's a retail job.
Yeah.
But being a pharmacy tech in a hospital where you're going to the patient's rooms and delivering meds and talking to them, and
I agree. I
like it.
Mm-hmm.
Would a misdemeanor, non-alcoholic, or assault from 5 years ago negatively affect my application with a low cumulative GPA, 3.3, but upward trend, clinical work experience, and research? So regardless of stats or anything else, having a red flag on your application, which a misdemeanor, having an arrest or conviction or anything on there, some schools will automatically say no thanks.
Yeah. So the answer is yes, it could negatively impact your application. It doesn't necessarily have to, but it could. Yep. Now you'll benefit that it was 5 years ago. You know, something that's more recent is going to be more concerned. But if it was, a freshman, thing that happened and whatever it was, then there's a lot more sort of flexibility with that than if it was real recent, and that was a more of a concern.
All right, let's talk promos again.
Promos. So if you are working on your primary application still, working on your personal statement, your extracurriculars, I know there are a few of you out there still straggling. Come see us if you need some help. If you're working on your secondary essays, learning how to answer those questions to the best of your ability, come see us. We can help. If you are all done with your primaries and secondaries and it's time to prepare for your interviews, come see us for help. With myself, Rachel, Dr. Scott Wright, and Verinia advising students here at MAPT, we can help you tell your story in a better way, whether that's through your essays or through your interview prep. And you can use the promo code SUMMER to save 20% off your primary and secondary essays, essay feedback, and interview prep over at mapped.com/services. Now, a lot of students may know me and not the other people. I have vetted all of these other people. They work with me because they believe in the same things that I believe in. The way they give feedback is very similar to how I give feedback, and may not be verbatim, and that's great because diversity of thought is also good. But they believe in the same things on how to tell your story and what to get across in your application. I am not taking any more advising through medicalschoolhq.net. If you go over there right now, everything redirects over to mapped.com. Application Academy for next cycle will also be on mapped.com soon. And it won't just be me teaching Application Academy in the future. It'll be the whole crew. So mapped.com/services for one-on-one advising help. And if you want to go check out Mapped, again, you can do that using the promo code 30 days free, I believe is that code.
That's right.
It'll give you 30 days instead of 14 days. And Mapped is not just a tool to help you keep track of everything. That's where you do that. I talked to a lot of students recently who used Mapped and are applying this cycle, both for the first time and as a repeat person. And now using Mapped, they just felt so much more prepared to apply to medical school because all of their information was in one spot. They didn't have to go find it in a notebook somewhere or an Excel spreadsheet somewhere. It was all in one spot. And with some new features coming soon, we'll help you even more through Mapped. So
awesome.
Lots of stuff coming.
So a couple quick questions in the chat, just clarifying the MAP subscription versus Mapped advising. Yep. So Mapped advising, the one-on-one work. So essay feedback for personal statement, ECs, secondaries, also your interview prep. That's all Mapped advising. That's where that summer code is going to help you. It's going to get you 20% off. Separately, Mapped app. So that's the monthly annual. It's the web application, the online platform that you're checking in with us every week, coming to these Ask the Deans, which are public once a month, but private every week, using the online tool to get feedback and updates from us. That's where the 30 days free is good. So 2 distinct promos for 2 distinct options.
Yep. And Jorge, one-on-one advising is not all 4 of us together. That would be fun, but no, it's one of us.
Yeah, one of the 4 of us.
Yes.
Otherwise, it would be 1-on-4 advising.
Yeah, that's true.
Someone says, where can we ask questions next time? So we do these once a month publicly, and the public ones you can do through the public Facebook channels or YouTube. If you're a Mapped member, then there's a private Facebook group, and you can come every week and ask those through the private Facebook group.
You get more of us.
More.
Who wouldn't want more of us?
I mean, for me, that's the best perk. $7.99 a month for an hour with us every week. I mean, we know our stuff. We are occasionally funny.
Looking.
And as a group, I was going to say, as a group, we are so attractive.
I mean, that's important.
All right.
Well, awesome. Thank you, everyone, for coming for our live Ask the Dean, public Ask the Dean, which we do typically on the first Monday of every month. And we appreciate all of you coming. Please go sign up for Mapped, and then you come hang out with us every Monday, not just the first Monday of the month.
That's right.
Yep.
We'll see you
We're a
fun.
fun bunch.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.